Okay, so we've learnt how to break down skills into the continua, the classifications, and now we're moving on to this section called application of classification to the organisation and determination of practice. And what a load of gibberish, so I can imagine you're totally wondering what on earth that means. But perhaps the key word is application and to practice, because we're now going to pretty much look at having broken down skills and understanding what they're built like or how they're made up using our ChemPod analysis. We need to now choose the best way to present the skill so that somebody can learn how to do it. So this is very much about how you present a skill to a learner. And we'll go through this quite carefully. So specification has two bits to it. Describe methods of manipulating manipulating skills, practice to facilitate learning and improve performance. So how can we manipulate a skill to basically make people learn better? How can we present a skill to make them learn better? And evaluate critically these methods. So know the advantages and disadvantages of each of the types of presentation of practice. So when will they be effective and when less so? So how do we determine what's the best way to present a skill to a learner? We might, as we've said already, think about how it's designed, so the classifications of the skill, so using those continua, think about how the skill is broken down or not. But also there might be some performer characteristics, so this is to do with the skill or the task itself, but it also might matter who the performers are. And you might bear in mind age, experience, ability, whether they're males or females, or how motivated they are to learn before you decide how to present your skills to them and how to practice. So there are four ways essentially that you might manipulate or present a practice. Parts, progressive parts, whole, whole part, whole. And we'll look at each one of these and then briefly talk about the advantages and disadvantages. It might be worth you pausing on the advantages and disadvantages, because I'm not going to explain every one in terms of time, but then you can take it in yourself. So firstly, let's look at the part method of presenting a practice to a learner or manipulating a practice. And the example I've chosen is a basketball layup. So the process of this part method is you would teach one part of the skill. So I've kind of symbolized it by the S because the word's going to be skill. So I'd teach them part one separately, just the dribbling, because a layup is a dribbling shot. You dribble into the basket and you take your 2 steps and you make a shot on the basket. So you've taught them the first part. You then teach them the second part, which might be how to do a takeoff step. You then separate the third part, so the I, the shooting technique. You might then teach them another bit, another part to the skill. Practice maybe a stationary 2-step approach, so the 2 steps before your shots. And then you might put the bounce step, so that another separate part. At no point here have we put it all together. We've learnt parts of a skill separately. And then at the end of that all, having taught them all the bits that make up this skill, all the subroutines, we might put the whole thing together to perform the skill as a whole. So the part method teach each individual subroutine separately and then eventually apply them all together. You can imagine there are advantages and disadvantages to this. The advantages is that if you have very complicated skills or very dangerous skills, then you can take it step by step. You don't need to overload them or put them at risk by doing too much. And this would be really appropriate for beginners also. If somebody might be overwhelmed by learning the whole thing, teach them by part. Serial skills, which have discrete sections, you can teach by part. Or low organisation skills where there are lots of subroutines. It's appropriate maybe to use the part method to teach the bits. However, you would lose what we call kinesthetic sense, i.e. the feel of the whole movement put together. You learn it in separate sections, you might lose the flow of the movement. It can be really time consuming teaching something bit by bit, and probably frustrating for the learners, so there are some downsides. Progressive part, similar but different. So there's bits to it, but the progressive word is important. So a dance sequence would be a good example of this. What you would do is teach the first part, the first move. You would then teach them the second part, the second move, or the second part of their sequence. Before you did anything else, you would practice those two together until you've pretty much perfected it. Only then would you teach them another move, another bit to their sequence. And then before you move on, you practice those 3 bits together until you've mastered it. Then another part, and then you put those parts together till you've mastered it, and then the final part, and you practice the whole motif as as one collective sequence. So you master the progressively the bits added together before you move on, which is different from just learning all the separate bits and then at the end putting it together. So quite different. Advantages of this, some similar, because you're taking it bit by bit. Again, all the similar advantages here for something that may be dangerous or complicated. But what you might get is some flow into this. So as you're putting them together throughout, you keep that flow, that sense of kinesthetic sense that the performer has. And you'll get a sense of achievement because they're mastering things as they go along. However, it might be time consuming and slow, and it's possible people might lose concentration and be a bit frustrated again because it is a bit slower than doing something as a whole. The whole method skill or practice of a skill. So what you essentially do is present them with the whole skill and they practice it. So there's no parts to this right now. You just let them have a go. You might need to be careful with what sorts of skills you do with this though. So the advantages of doing whole method practice or teaching as a whole is that the performer hopefully will get a proper sense of what it should feel like to do the whole skill all in one. If they get it, or if they even mostly get it, it could be much quicker than teaching them by part. It transfers the skill to the real situation. So again, there's a sense of reality and how it should feel in its full sense. This would be really effective for motivated or experienced or perhaps even more able performers who might pick it up quite quickly. And this is necessary for skills which are highly organised, which are very hard to break down. If you can't break it down into parts anyway, you've kind of got to have a go at it as a whole. However, this might not be suited to complicated skills or dangerous skills. You probably would be totally negligent of you as a trampolining coach to say to a learner, go and have a go at a somersault, just have a go, because that's way too complicated and dangerous for them to do that. It's not appropriate really for skills which have low organisation. You run the risk of perhaps them performing it well. So if you can break it down, sometimes that can help. And it might be daunting or demoralising for those less experienced or less confident to just having to try this whole skill all at once. So for them, part or progressive part might be more suitable. Finally then, whole part whole, as you guess, might be a combination or is a combination. So I've given the example here of a tennis serve. And what this might mean is you teach them and let them have a go at the whole serve action. You might spot that maybe one of the subroutines is a little weak, perhaps the ball toss. So their actual action, body action is good, but maybe the ball toss is not high enough or wonky. You would then address that, practice that part before reapplying it to the whole. So whole, part, whole. Have a go at everything, pick out a weak subroutine, practice that separately, reapply it to the whole. Advantages then can be relatively quicker, certainly than the parts practice method, and you might gain this kinesthetic sense, which is really important as you progress and become better. May not be appropriate for dangerous or highly organised skills that are hard to break down. It is possible to do different practice methods for the same skill. So the tennis serve is a really nice example. You could teach it as whole. You could do whole, part, whole, as we just discussed. You could do the part, so you could do the stance, you could do the backswing, you could do the follow through, teach those bits separately, and at the end do the whole. Or you could do it progressive part, teach them a little bit, add a bit on, practice the 2, teach another bit, add a bit on, practice those 3 parts, teach the ball toss, practice those parts, add the connection, the execution, and then eventually have it as the whole. So Again, know why certain practice methods are suited to certain skills, but be able to justify your reasoning for that, and that's really very important. So, part, progressive part, whole, or whole part whole. Four methods of manipulating or presenting practices to a learner.